In 1916, two men sat down with a map of the Middle East and drew straight lines across it. No local leaders in the room, no say for the people who lived there. Those lines, the story goes, became Iraq, Syria, Jordan, and more. That story is almost completely wrong. The real agreement between Mark Sykes and François-Georges Picot never became law. It wasn't even a treaty. It was just an exchange of letters. And within 4 years, it got thrown out, replaced by a different deal, one that moved Mosul and all of Palestine into completely different hands. So if this famous document didn't draw the modern map, what did it actually do? And why do we still blame it for borders it never created? By late 1915, the Ottoman Empire was fighting alongside Germany. Britain and France started quietly talking about what would happen to Ottoman Arab land if the Allies won the war. Sir Mark Sykes led the talks for Britain, François-Georges Picot for France. They even got Imperial Russia on board through its foreign minister, Sergei Sazonov. At the same time, Britain was also talking to Sharif Hussein of Mecca. They wanted him to lead an Arab revolt against the Ottomans. In return, they promised Arab independence after the war. These promises would later clash with what Britain and France were cooking up in secret. Here's the first thing worth knowing. This wasn't one big treaty with a map of hard borders. It was just a bunch of letters. Each one described a different kind of control. Sykes and Picot first signed off on a memo on January 3, 1916. Then the British and French governments made it official by exchanging letters on May 9th and 16th. So it wasn't a single, unified treaty like most people picture. That matters, because the popular image of two men drawing one decisive map hides how messy and unfinished the real deal actually was. Next, Russia had a price for letting Britain and France carve things up. Russia wanted Constantinople and the Straits. And they got that promise months before Sykes and Picot even met. Russia didn't agree for free. In March 1915, Britain and France signed the Constantinople Agreement. They said Russia could have Constantinople itself, plus the western side of the Bosphorus, the Sea of Marmara, and the Dardanelles. This was a huge deal for Russia. It was something they'd wanted for 100 years, and Britain had always stopped them. We tend to forget this because the deal never actually happened. The Russian Revolution pulled Russia out of the war before it could take effect. The new Bolshevik government threw out all the old claims, but it shows something the popular story misses. This wasn't just Britain and France dividing things up. It was a three-way deal, and Russia's price was the very thing Britain had fought for 100 years to keep out of their hands. Only Russia's collapse in 1917 kept that problem from blowing up. Here's the third point. Most of this land wasn't meant for direct colonial rule at all. The plan was an independent Arab state, or a group of states, under French or British influence, not their direct control. The agreement said France and Britain were, quote, prepared to recognize and protect an independent Arab state or a confederation of Arab states, end quote. These were zones of priority and influence, not straight takeovers. Only 2 strips of coast were marked for direct rule. A blue zone for France along the Syrian coast and southeastern Anatolia, and a red zone for Britain around Baghdad and Basra. The huge interior, called Zones A and B, was supposed to stay Arab land, mostly independent. France held priority in Zone A. Britain held it in Zone B. That's a much messier picture than 2 powers just dividing up the region. Fourth, Palestine was never handed to Britain in the first agreement. It was supposed to be run by an international group. Palestine held holy sites important to more than one religion. So Picot pushed to keep it out of either country's direct zone and put it under international control instead, worked out with Russia and the other allies. What actually happened after the war, a British-run mandate, wasn't in Sykes-Picot at all. That came later. Fifth, Britain had been secretly pushing for an Arab revolt of its own. It kicked off just weeks after Sykes-Picot was finished, and the men leading it had no idea the agreement even existed. Sharif Hussein launched the Arab Revolt in June 1916. Barely a month after Britain and France signed off on Sykes-Picot for good, his son, Faisal, led Arab fighters alongside British officers, including T.E. Lawrence. They fought through campaigns that took Damascus in October 1918. Faisal believed winning would bring the independence. McMahon's letters seemed to promise. He pushed that claim at the 1919 Paris Peace Conference. He even talked briefly with Zionist leader Chaim Weizmann about Arabs and Jews working together. That agreement fell apart within months, as wartime promises crashed into the new mandate system. Faisal was made king of a short-lived Arab kingdom in Damascus. French forces removed him within the year. Britain then put him on the throne of the newly created Iraq instead. A consolation prize that shows exactly who was really drawing the post-war map. Not Damascus, not Baghdad, London and Paris. Sixth, the real deal after the war didn't match the 1916 letters. Not on Mosul, not on Palestine. At the San Remo Conference in April 1920, the new mandate system handed Mosul and its oil to Britain, not France. That flipped the original plan on its head. Palestine, instead of going to an international group like Sykes-Picot said, went under a British mandate too. The map that made Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, and Jordan came out of San Remo and the mandates that followed. They used Sykes-Picot as a starting point. Then they tore most of it up and rebuilt it around who actually held power once the war was over. Seventh, and this is the real damage, it wasn't the borders, it was the trust it burned once people found out. While Sykes and Picot talked in secret, Britain was also writing to Sharif Hussein. 10 letters between Sir Henry McMahon and Hussein, from July 1915 to March 1916, promised Arab independence across a huge stretch of land. But one line in McMahon's letter, from October 24, 1915, left out, quote, portions of Syria lying to the west of the districts of Damascus, Homs, Hama, and Aleppo, end quote. People have argued for decades over what that actually meant. A narrow strip of coast, or the interior cities themselves? Hussein read it as the narrow strip. He launched his revolt on that reading. Sykes-Picot, worked out at the same time and never shown to Hussein, carved up exactly the interior land that line was supposed to protect. Then, in November 1917, the Bolsheviks published the whole text, along with the Constantinople Agreement, along with other secret deals Britain and France had made. Arab and Zionist leaders read it, and the reaction was immediate. The terms clashed with what Hussein had been promised, and they said nothing about the Jewish homeland Britain would promise weeks later, in the Balfour Declaration. Most of the actual lines in Sykes-Picot never made it onto the post-war map. What did last was what its exposure proved. Britain had been making 3 promises it couldn't keep, all at once, in secret, to people who each thought they had an exclusive deal. So the popular version, Sykes-Picot as the one document that carved up the modern Middle East, gets it backward. The real borders came from San Remo, the mandate deals, and years of fighting and haggling after that. Not from a straight reading of a 1916 letter. What Sykes-Picot actually did was set a pattern, secret deals between great powers, Ottoman Arab land treated as something to hand out between European patrons, or trade away to a third power for its help. None of it asked what the people actually living there wanted. The specific lines got redrawn almost right away. The habit behind them didn't go so easily. The lines on that map lasted 4 years. The habit behind them didn't. Deciding another region's future in secret, in a room in London or Paris, with no one from that region in the room, that outlasted the map by more than a century. And that habit didn't start with Sykes and Picot either. It came from a much older fight. Over a stretch of water, the British spent 100 years making sure Russia never got. That's the next video.